Hi guys, welcome back to our C++ series. This is episode 3, and in this video we're going to be going over functions, as well as finally figuring out what using namespace standard is. This is going to be a great video to lead into episode 4, which is about more advanced functions. And if you can understand functions, you're going to be well on your way to getting a stronger grip on C++ because C++ uses functions a lot. So firstly, what are functions? Functions are, in the technical sense, a collection of code that's going to be executed sequentially. However, if you remember in our last video, you'll know that functions are just code that can be called to run. If I tell a program to run a piece of code, it'll run it as many times as I tell it to, as long as there's not something in the code itself telling it not to run. Functions are similar to data types in that they need a return type, or you'll get an error. Unlike data types, though, functions can be void. So they can be int, double, string, all of the data types that we learned, but they can also be void. Don't let this word confuse you though. If a function is void, it just means it doesn't have a return type. It's not going to return something, which you'll see what that means later on in this video. And if you remember from last time, int main is a function. So essentially, we're creating functions ourselves, and these are known as user-defined functions. Let's say that we have a function called sayHello, and when we create this, we're going to need to give it a type. So in order to make a function, you're going to go outside of main, and you're going to type in void, because it's not going to return anything, and then your function name. So say hello. Now for functions, you have to give them parentheses just like main. In our next video, we're going to learn what we can actually put inside of these parentheses, but for now we're going to leave it empty. You're going to create your curly brackets just like in main. Essentially, you're creating main, but you're giving it a different name. And then now we get to make it do something. So we're going to type in cout, hello, and then world. You're going to end your line. Make sure you put your semicolon on the end. So getting back to using namespace standard. This is a good example of why we have this line of code at the top and what we would need to do if we didn't have this. So in programming languages, you can't have variable names be the same thing. I can't define something as cout, for example, using the standard namespace because it's already reserved for the standard namespace. So if we didn't have this, we comment this out, we're going to get some errors here. Cout is undefined and so is endl. And that's because cout and endl are part of the standard namespace. So what we could do is type in standard, double colons, and that's going to get rid of the error. We're telling the compiler that we are using cout within the standard namespace, and the same with endl. Now this is great. You're going to see code like this. A lot of people don't like using namespace standard because of the limitations of not being able to have your own variables. My personal opinion is, if you are a beginner, it's hard to remember to put the standard : each time you want to write endl or cout or cin or anything within the standard namespace, string included. So I would recommend using namespace standard at least while you're learning, and then if you want to forgo using it as you get better, by all means do what you prefer. Alright, so if you want to make a comment, you can say this is say hello. And for those of you wondering why I write things like this, with the lowercase in the front and the uppercase for the second word, that's just a standard that people use, and it's just a way of typing things. You can do it however you want, but adopting a standard early on is going to let you have more precise and clean code. Okay, so now if we go back into main, how do we call this function? It's simple. We already have it defined. We already know what it's going to do. Let's put say hello here, and as you see, Visual Studio is going to pop up because it thinks it knows what you're going to say. So you're going to put say hello with your parentheses and then a semicolon. So now if we click local Windows debugger and run the program, it's going to say hello world. And this is because in main, the compiler kind of starts at the top and it's going to work its way down. There's nothing here until it gets to say hello. So it sees say hello and it's going to jump to the function. So here it is. It says, okay, now that we're in see hello, what do you want me to do? And all that we have it doing is displaying hello world. When it reaches this, there's nothing getting returned because it's void. So it's going to bounce back in below hello. And that's important to know. When you leave the function, it's going to come out to right below where the function was. So we can actually run other functions underneath of this. If we wanted to test that, let's go above say hello, type in a cout statement, and say we are in main to let us know that we are in the main function. And remember from our previous videos, if you want to not use end to L, you can create a new line here and then end your line with a semicolon. We're going to put the say hello, and then underneath of that, let's put we are out, out of say hello. So now, when we run our program, it's going to start at the top. It's going to see that we have a cout. We are in main. It's going to jump to say hello. So it's going to say hello world. And then, just like we learned, it's going to go right below say hello. So it's going to say we are out of say hello. So there we go. We can close this window. We're done with it. So now, what if we want to have multiple functions? It's very easy. So we're going to go back up here, make sure that we're out of main. We cannot, in C++, declare a function within another function. You can in other languages, and it's a really big part of other languages, but you cannot do it in C++. So don't try, you'll give yourself a headache. Just make sure if you're doing a function, it's outside of another function. So let's create another void, and then say goodbye. Remember, parentheses, they're going to be empty for this video. Do your curly brackets, and then when we're in here, let's do cout, and then goodbye. End your line, and then now we have two functions, one that says hello and one that says goodbye. What we can do from here is within our say hello function, we can tell it that we want it to call say goodbye. So now, when we come to our main, it's going to go down, we're going to be in main, it's going to say hello, and then it's going to call say goodbye. But look, there were build errors. Why is that? Well, it's simple. With functions, you cannot call a function before it gets declared. This is called a declaration. And it's a declaration and a definition in one. And what that means is you're giving it its existence. When you type it in, it exists in the code, and then what it actually does is its definition. If you want to call say goodbye in say hello, you have to actually declare it before say hello. Now, we're not going to have the same issue if we were to take this out and put say hello here. Whoops. You put say hello here, and then change this to say goodbye. And we click run. It's going to work no problem. And that's because we declared say hello before we tried to call it. So look, we are in main. It's going to call say goodbye, hello world, and then goodbye. So remember, when we call say goodbye, it's going to jump to say goodbye. It's going to run say hello, and then when it's done in say hello, it's going to jump out to right where it was before we called the function, which happened to be goodbye. And then when we're out of goodbye, it's going to jump again below it where it was before we called the function. So now we're out of say hello. But in this case, it was say goodbye. So what can we do if we want to run say goodbye from say hello and we want to run it like this. Make sure you comment out say hello, or you'll have an endless loop, and that's not good. So if we want to use say goodbye before we actually have it below the say hello, then we can just say void say goodbye. And there you go. So now you're just saying, at some point in my code, I'm going to be using say goodbye, and it's going to be of type void. It doesn't have a definition yet, but that's okay. We'll define it later on in the code. So go ahead and click run. And there we go. We are in main. Whoops. We forgot to switch this to say hello. Let's do that really quick. There we go. So say hello. So we're going to come into the main. We are in main. It's going to jump to say hello. It's going to jump to say goodbye and say goodbye. And then once you're in say goodbye, it's going to jump back to say hello. And then we're going to come out and say that we are out of say hello. So what if we want to use a function that's not of type void? What do we do? Well, let's take this for example. Let's declare a function called int getSum. So now we're telling the compiler that at some point we're going to be using a function called getSum. And here in Visual Studio, it's going to underline this in green because we didn't define getSum anywhere. But if we go down below, say goodbye, and we type in int getSum, then what we can do is get the sum of two numbers. So let's declare two local variables called int x and y, and let's assign x to 4 and y to 5. So what we can do is, actually let's declare one more int variable called z. So what we can do is say that z is equal to x plus y. So z is going to be equal to 9. And we can allow the user to type these in, but for now let's just see how it works. And then we're going to type down here return z, because we want to return the number, the integer z, and that's why the return type of getSum is int. So let's get rid of this really quick. If we're in main and we type in cout getSum with our parentheses and then end that line, what's going to happen is when we press run, it's going to display the return of getSum, which is 9. So what can we do with this that's not just hard coding in numbers? Well, what we can do is come up here and delete y equals 5 and x equals 4. And let's use what we learned from our last video to actually get the user to input some numbers. So let's type in cout, please enter a number to add. And then let's get that as x. Beneath that, let's cout, please enter the second number. I'm going to cin y. And then what's going to happen? Well, we're going to get the x from the user, we're going to get the y from the user, and then z is going to get the sum of x and y. And because our function is returning an integer, it's going to return z for us. So, back down in main, cout getSum. So let's try it now. Alright, please enter a number to add. Let's do 50. Please enter a number to add. Let's do 25. There we go. It's going to return z, which is the sum of 50 and 25. And there we go. And that is how you return objects and variables in C++. Now, this is just the introduction to functions. There are different and very powerful things you can do with functions. We'll get to those in a later video. The next video, we're going to find out how we can actually pass items and variables to a function. So if we already have x and y from a different function and we want to get it into another function, how are we going to get it there? Well, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned for episode 4. We are going to go into more advanced functions, how to pass parameters, and we're going to be able to do some very cool and interesting things. So don't forget to comment, rate, and subscribe, and I'll see you there.